Imagine this. You're a billionaire. You've got it all. An empire, a mansion, and more money than you could ever spend. But what if, despite all of that, you were completely blind to the world right under your nose? This is the story of Michael Hargrove, a man who thought he understood life. That is, until one night, a late-night curiosity led him to follow his quiet, loyal maid, Clara, after work. What he discovered about her, about the life she's been hiding, would change everything he thought he knew about success, sacrifice, and the people he relied on every day. Stick around to find out what happens when a billionaire uncovers the hidden truth behind the woman who's been serving him for over 2 decades. Trust me, you won't see this coming.
The sound of a car door slamming shut echoed through the empty streets. Michael Hargrove, a billionaire businessman known for his cold, calculated approach to life, watched his old maid, Clara, as she left his mansion. He had always seen her as a quiet, dedicated worker, someone who kept to herself and never asked for anything. But tonight, something about her behavior caught his attention. Her usual smile was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to hang over her like a cloud. He stood behind the curtains of his luxurious office, peering out through the glass, his curiosity gnawing at him. Clara had been with him for over 20 years, since he was a young man starting his career. She had served him faithfully, never once questioning him or seeking attention. But lately, something had been off. She seemed more distant, more tired. He couldn't put his finger on it, but tonight, he decided he would find out. Michael had everything: a massive estate, a fleet of cars, a beautiful wife, and more money than he knew what to do with. But there was one thing he couldn't buy: answers. And tonight, he intended to find them. As Clara walked down the driveway, Michael slipped on his coat, grabbed his keys, and made his way to the garage. The sleek black car rumbled to life as he pulled out of the driveway, carefully keeping his distance from her. He watched as she walked with her head down, her pace slow but determined. She didn't look back, not even once, and that only deepened Michael's curiosity. She made her way through the city streets, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the night. Michael followed her, keeping a safe distance but never losing sight of her. The streets became less familiar, the lights dimmer. He passed by his usual haunts, but Clara led him into parts of the city he didn't recognize. This wasn't the wealthy part of town he was accustomed to. This was the rough side, where the streets were lined with abandoned buildings and the air smelled of neglect and decay. Clara's footsteps quickened as she turned a corner, disappearing into a narrow alleyway. Michael followed, trying not to attract attention. He reached the end of the alleyway where a small, weathered apartment building stood. He parked his car a few yards away, watching as Clara entered the building. The door creaked shut behind her, and Michael's heart raced. What was going on? Why had she come here? This was nothing like the life he had imagined for her. He had always seen Clara as a background figure, someone who cleaned the house, cooked his meals, and stayed in the shadows. But this was something he had never expected. Minutes passed before the door to the apartment building opened again. Clara emerged, but this time she wasn't alone. A young girl, no older than 10, walked beside her. Clara placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder, guiding her carefully down the steps. The girl looked up at her with wide eyes, and for a brief moment, Michael could see the tenderness in Clara's gaze. She wasn't just a maid, she was a mother, a protector, a woman who had more responsibility than Michael could ever have imagined. His heart sank as he watched them walk down the street, the girl's small hand held tightly in Clara's. They turned the corner and disappeared from view. Michael sat in his car, stunned. He didn't know what to make of it. Clara had never spoken about her family, never mentioned anything about a child. What was going on? He didn't want to invade her privacy, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to know more. He couldn't let this curiosity go unanswered. As he watched the empty street, a mix of guilt and confusion filled him. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable. Michael's mind raced as he drove back to the mansion. His thoughts were a whirlwind of questions. Who was that little girl? Was she Clara's daughter? If so, why had she never mentioned her? He had never thought to ask about her personal life. Clara was just a maid after all. But now he realized how much he had known about her. How much had she kept hidden from him? He had always prided himself on being a man who understood people, who could read anyone with a glance. But Clara? She had remained a mystery, and now he was beginning to see just how much he had overlooked. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, his mind consumed by the image of Clara and the girl. He had to know the truth. The next day, he decided to confront her. He didn't know what he would say or how he would approach it, but he had to get answers. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Michael walked into the kitchen, where Clara was already preparing breakfast. She didn't look up when he entered, her hands moving methodically as she sliced vegetables and stirred the pot on the stove. Michael stood for a moment, watching her. She was so calm, so composed. But now he saw her differently. "Clara?" he said, his voice breaking the silence. She paused, her hands stilling for a moment before she turned to face him. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Michael thought he saw something flicker in them, a kind of guardedness. It was as if she knew what he was going to ask. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Clara nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Of course, Mr. Hargrove. Everything is fine." Michael didn't buy it. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of something heavy pressing down on her like an anchor. She was hiding something, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much of Clara's life he had never bothered to uncover. His mind raced again with the unanswered questions he hadn't even known to ask. Why was she so guarded? Why had she kept her family life so secret? Clara exactly what Clara had been through to provide for her daughter, but he knew now he had to do more. "Clara," he said again, his voice now steady but more insistent. "I saw you last night. I followed you." Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't look surprised. She seemed to have known this moment would come. She set down the knife she was holding, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and looked at him. I noticed the way she closed off, her posture becoming more rigid. It was as if she had been preparing for this moment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice soft but clear. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." Michael's chest tightened as he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. For the first time, he saw Clara as a woman who had her own life, her own struggles. She wasn't just the maid in his mansion. She was a person with a story that he had never bothered to learn. "Who was that girl?" Michael asked, his voice softening. Clara took a deep breath before she spoke. "That was my daughter, Jasmine." His heart skipped a beat. "Your daughter?" he repeated, stunned. Clara's eyes softened with a quiet sadness, as if her heart had just opened to him for the first time. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's everything to me. I've been trying to give her a life that I never had, a chance for something better." Michael's mind was spinning. Clara had a daughter, a child who had been living in a world so different from his own. He had never once thought to ask her about her family, never mentioned anything about a child. What had he been doing all these years? How had he been so blind to the life that Clara had been living outside of his mansion? "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with guilt. Clara looked away, her eyes clouded with emotion. "I didn't think it was any of your business," she said softly. "I didn't want you to feel sorry for me. I've worked hard to keep my personal life separate from my work." Michael felt a pang of shame. He had never once thought to ask her about her life. He had been too consumed with his own wealth and success to notice the struggles of the people around him. But now, standing before Clara, he understood just how much he had missed. "I'm sorry," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. Clara gave him a small, weary smile. "It's all right. You didn't have to know." Michael felt something inside him shift. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Clara had been hiding her pain and struggle for so long, and he had never even bothered to ask. How many others in his life had he overlooked in the same way? People who worked for him, people who depended on him, yet he had failed to truly see them. Clara's life had been full of sacrifice, and he had never acknowledged that. But now it came crashing down on him.
"I should have known," Michael said, his voice full of regret. "I should have seen it. I was so wrapped up in my own world, I never saw yours." Clara met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "It's all right," she said again, her voice gentle. You weren't supposed to see it, but now you do." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared moment of realization. Michael wasn't just apologizing for what he had missed. He was realizing that he had been missing the most important things in life. Over the next few weeks, Michael couldn't stop thinking about Clara and her daughter. He found himself watching her more closely, trying to understand the woman he had never truly seen. He began to notice the little things, the way she would take extra shifts, the way she always put others before herself. He realized just how much she had sacrificed for her family, how much she had given without ever asking for anything in return. One day after work, Michael decided to do something he had never done before. He drove to Clara's apartment. He didn't know what he expected to find, but something deep within him told him he had to see it for himself. As he walked up to the apartment building, his mind raced. What had he really learned about Clara? What kind of life had she been living all these years? He hadn't just been blind to her struggles, he had been blind to everything that mattered. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Clara answered after a few moments, her expression unreadable. She looked surprised, but not angry. There was no tension between them, only a quiet understanding. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "What brings you here?" "I just wanted to talk," Michael said, his voice a little shaky. "If that's all right." Clara stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The apartment was small but cozy. There were family photos on the walls and a few simple but well-kept furnishings. The space had warmth, something Michael hadn't expected. He had imagined it would be dreary, a reflection of the life he had imagined Clara lived. But it wasn't. It was full of life, love, and memories. "I wanted to apologize," Michael said, his voice thick with regret. "I've treated you like you were just someone who worked for me. I never once took the time to understand you, to see who you really are." Clara looked down, her hands clasped in front of her. "It's okay," she said quietly. "You didn't need to." I felt a lump form in my throat. "I should have known," he said. "I should have seen it. I was so wrapped up in my own world, I never saw yours." Clara met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I don't blame you," she said. "You never had to see it. But now I always hoped someone would." Michael shifted uncomfortably, standing in the middle of the small apartment. He was a man who had built his empire through hard work and ruthless decisions. Yet here, in front of Clara, he felt small. She wasn't someone who needed to be saved. She was someone who had built a life for herself against all odds. And he, the billionaire who could buy anything, had been blind to it all. "I've been thinking," Michael said, his voice more determined now. "I want to help. I don't know how, but I want to make things right." Clara's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but Michael quickly added, "Not as your employer, not as someone who's giving charity, but as someone who understands, finally, what it means to struggle, what it means to fight for something better." Clara closed her eyes for a moment, as if processing his words. She seemed torn between gratitude and disbelief. She had never expected anything from him. In her eyes, Michael had always been the wealthy, detached businessman, never someone who would understand her life. "I don't need charity," Clara said, her voice firm but gentle. "I've always made do with what I have, and I want to keep it that way." "I know," Michael nodded. "I'm not offering charity, but I can help you. I can help Jasmine. I want to make sure that you and she don't have to keep struggling the way you have." Clara looked at him, her gaze searching his face. There was no hint of the guardedness that had once defined her interactions with him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the remorse for the years of indifference. "I don't want you to feel sorry for me," she said softly. I don't want pity. I've worked hard, and I'm proud of everything I've done. I just want to make sure my daughter has a chance to have what I never could." "I understand," Michael replied quietly. "I'm not offering pity. I'm offering support, a chance to help you both reach the potential you deserve." Clara's expression softened. She didn't say anything for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, she nodded. "I don't know what to say, but thank you for seeing me, for finally seeing the life I've been living." Michael reached out, touching her arm lightly. "You deserve more than that, Clara. You've given so much without asking for anything in return. Now let me give something back." Clara smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never expected this from you. I've always seen you as the businessman who only cares about profit. But now, I see a man who cares." The realization hit Michael harder than he had imagined. It wasn't just about giving Clara a better job or paying for her daughter's education. It was about understanding her, truly seeing her as a person and not just an employee. And that was something far more valuable than anything money could buy. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Michael, no longer consumed by his own empire, found himself more present, more involved in the lives of those around him. He spent time with Clara and Jasmine, getting to know them not through the lens of his wealth, but through their lives and struggles. It was a world so different from his own, one filled with resilience, hope, and the strength of a mother's love. He arranged for Jasmine to attend a better school, one that would give her the opportunities Clara had always dreamed of. He helped Clara find a more stable job, one that would provide her with the respect she deserved, not just as a maid, but as a woman with ambition and strength. He didn't do it because he pitied her. He did it because he realized how much she had given without ever asking for anything in return. One evening, as Michael sat in his office, his mind was filled with the changes that had taken place. He had begun investing in community programs, trying to make a difference in the lives of people like Clara, people who worked hard every day, yet still struggled to make ends meet. He had started to see the value in using his wealth for more than just luxury and status. He wanted to give back, to help create opportunities for those who had been overlooked, just like Clara had been. As he reflected on his journey, Michael heard a knock on his office door. He turned to see Clara standing there, her figure framed in the doorway. She had changed, not just in the way she carried herself, but in her entire demeanor. She wasn't the quiet maid who had once been invisible to him. She was a woman who had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her future. "Clara," Michael said, standing up to greet her, "what's on your mind?" She stepped into the room, looking around as if the space had suddenly become unfamiliar to her. She said, "I just wanted to thank you," she said quietly, her voice warm but filled with emotion. "You've done so much for us. I don't know how to express how grateful I am." Michael smiled softly, feeling the weight of her words. "You don't have to thank me, Clara. You've done everything for yourself. I just helped open a few doors. You're the one who walked through them." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, you didn't just open doors. You changed our lives. You changed mine. You saw me, not just as your maid, but as a person." Michael's throat tightened. He had never been good with emotions, especially not his own, but now, with Clara standing before him, he realized how much he had missed, how much he had been blind to. He had spent his life chasing success, but it had taken meeting Clara to make him understand what truly mattered.
Michael stepped closer, feeling a rush of emotion he had never allowed himself to experience before. "You deserve so much more than what I could ever give you," he said, his voice thick. "But I will always be here, not just as your employer, but as a friend, someone who respects you for everything you are."
Clara's smile widened, and for the first time, Michael saw her as the strong, beautiful woman she had always been. It wasn't her work that defined her. It was her strength, her heart, and her determination to make a better life for her daughter. "I don't need anything more," Clara said softly. "I have everything I need now." Michael's heart swelled with gratitude. He had come to realize that what he had gained through his wealth was nothing compared to the depth of connection he now shared with Clara. The emotional walls he had built around himself had crumbled, replaced by a newfound appreciation for the people who had been in his life all along. As Clara turned to leave, Michael called out to her, "Clara, wait." She turned, raising an eyebrow. "Yes?" "I want you to know, Michael, that I'm proud of you, for everything you've done, for everything you continue to do. You're an inspiration." Clara's eyes softened, her lips curling into a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove." He chuckled at the formality, the distance that still lingered between them, even after everything. "Call me Michael," he said, walking over to her. "I'm no longer your employer. I'm your friend." Clara nodded, her smile warm and full of understanding. "I'll remember that, Michael. I'll always remember." As she left the room, Michael stood there for a moment, taking in everything he had learned. He had spent so much of his life focused on the wrong things, money, status, success, but now he understood what truly mattered. It wasn't about how much you had, it was about how much you gave, how much you understood, and how much you connected with others. He walked to the window and looked out over the city, the lights twinkling in the distance. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He was a man who had found something deeper, something more valuable than anything money could buy.